So, Rich, I know with these cold opens, we usually go back and forth. We have a conversation. There's no conversation today. I'm just going to tell you a little story, something that happened this morning, dropping my son off at daycare. And as I drop him off every morning, he kind of gets a little upset and cries at times, which I appreciate. I'm cool with, right? Because that means that he loves me, right? He doesn't want me to go. That's fine. So it usually only lasts like 30 seconds or a minute or so. And so I walk out the door and I go to the front to where my car is parked. And his teacher usually picks him up as he's being sad, and they look out the window to say bye to daddy, and I wave back to them and I'm able to then go, and he feels really good. Well, today I go outside and I look back at the window and there he is standing there with his teacher, and I'm sitting there waving and I'm like, yeah, goodbye. Have a great day. Well, as I'm doing that, a grandma and her grandson come walking up the sidewalk right in front of that window. And lo and behold, they think that I'm waving at them. So the grandma is waving back, and I've never seen these people in my life. They're waving back. It was one of the most awkward moments of at least my week, but probably my month so far, if you count May as well. And I gotta say, Grandma, I was looking right past you the way that I'm looking right past Jared Goff in my season-long leagues this year. I'm JJ, and last year I tried my hardest to become a best ball bro. I drafted over 500 teams, I talked to some of the most successful best ball players in existence, and I admittedly had mixed results. So this year, I'm going to chase that title once again. My plan is to max enter DraftKings Millionaire Maker, and I'm going to document all of it while talking to the brightest best ball minds on the planet. Last year, I didn't quite get there, but this year, this is going to be the year where I officially become a best ball bro. This episode is sponsored by DraftKings. There's no better way to lock in your fantasy dominance early than with Best Ball on DraftKings, where you draft once and ride your roster all season long. And right now, DraftKings is giving all customers a can't-miss offer. Draft one, get one. Enter a lineup in the $15 million Best Ball contest for just $20, and you'll score another Best Ball ticket to play free for a share of that $15 million, giving you a second shot to win big. It's easy. Just draft your dream team once, no weekly management required, and let your top scorers automatically start each week. Across the whole season, every breakout star, every clutch play, every touchdown will count towards your quest for a share of $15 million. I'm drafting over there all the time. It's an absolute blast. So download the DraftKings Daily Fantasy app now to draft your $20 best ball lineup to play for a share of $15 million and get a second ticket to play free for a share of that $15 million. That's two chances to win big without ever setting your lineup again. Draft one, get one, only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY to 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. 18 plus in most eligible states, but age varies by jurisdiction. Eligibility restrictions apply. Void where prohibited. One per customer. Enter the Best Ball $15 million headliner contest by 9/4/25 to get one bonus entry. $20 entry fee required. Reward expires in 30 days. See terms at DraftKings.com/NFL-best-ball. Sponsored by DK. Now back to the show. Welcome into another episode of Becoming a Best Ball Bro. I'm JJ Zacharyson, joined as always by Rich Ryan. Rich, what's going on, buddy?
Doing good. Turbulent times for my New York Knickerbockers, obviously flamed out against the Pacers. It was pretty much all over after that insane Halliburton shot in game one that bounced all the way up to whatever floor 52nd.
To Jim Irsay in heaven is what happened.
Yeah, I was going to say it hit the top of the Empire State Building and came down. But yeah, Jim Irsay with the assist there on the day of his passing. Tibbs gets fired right before we hit the big red record button. It's going to be an interesting summer for the Knicks as they try to figure out, do they keep Cat? What's the lineup look like? So getting to the conference finals is exciting. And then all of a sudden the transactions rule the day and you just don't know what next year is going to look like. So
I know people are confused. This is a football podcast. We are going to talk about fantasy football. No, it is weird to me though, how in the NBA, you'll see these coaches who have like crazy success and immediately get fired, whether it's this situation with the Knicks. But you never see that. Like in no world would an NFL head coach who gets to a conference final, conference championship, get fired the next year. That would never, ever happen.
Especially a team like the Knicks. Like, imagine if the Browns go to the conference championship game. Like, they're not axing their staff after that season.
No, they're giving them they're promoting, and they're giving them more extensions and more money. That's why it's so crazy that this stuff happens this isn't like an abnormal thing to happen in the NBA, right? Like, this is something that didn't the Nuggets do this recently, and the I guess the Bucks too did the. I mean, look, I'm very casual, so I could be saying this completely incorrectly, but hasn't that been going on with those?
No, you're right.
Too?
Budenholzer was canned from the Bucks, who had just won a championship, and Michael Malone was canned from the Nuggets after they had just won a championship as well. Entering the postseason, that was a bit weird, but I think if you look at it as someone has taken this team as far as they can, maybe this is something that should apply to football a little bit more, where when the Knicks were really bad, they needed someone like Tibbs to come in and be an adult and get them to where they are now. But now you need someone to take them over the line.
It's like it's like the Tony Dungy, John Gruden thing, or it's, honestly, I think that a lot of people in Pittsburgh think that it's the Mike Tomlin thing. Like, if your team is just a perennial loser, hire Mike Tomlin and you will at least get in the playoffs every year, and then maybe not do anything from there. But hey, you're out of that. Mike Tomlin could just be a consultant, right? And just hop from team to team, and then never win a championship. But yeah, man, we are in another week of best ball drafts over on DraftKings. How are things going with you? You still drafting some? Are you in some slow drafts right now?
Good. Yeah. No, I'm completely fast draft. I had this feeling last year, and you and Corinne confirmed it on the last episode when it comes to focus. You get this not maximum, but a very large time limit, and you have so much time to research and make the best decision. But ultimately what I do is I look at my team and I try to fill my team, as opposed to looking at the board and looking at where value might be if someone doesn't take a player or someone needs X player. And I just am not making optimal decisions. And I also just think the fast drafts are just more entertaining, right? I have a couple minutes here, half hour or so. I can just sit down and fire off a draft. So I just much prefer that strategy.
Yeah, no, I do think that they are, as I said with Corain, they are definitely better for that focus, right? Like, especially when you get in the late rounds, like I almost dread some of the slow drafts that I'm in. Like right now, I maxed all of the lower entry fee, whether it's single entry or like 5 max, whatever. I've maxed all of them. And so there haven't been new contests that have appeared in that sort of bucket. And so all of my slow drafts are now in the latter rounds for the most part. I have some that are like, round 7 or so, but so many of them are like round 18, round 19, round 20. And by that point in time, every time you open up the app, then you go and you look at that lineup, you're like, oh man, I gotta remember where I was at in this draft and all that kind of stuff. I think that you can, if you can just fire off as many fast drafts as you possibly can, then you're in a better spot to really know what's going on. And you can get more volume in that way too, more than likely. Like, just like in terms of, like quality volume is really what I mean by doing that. I'm going to only do fast drafts for the Millie Maker, and I'm going to be starting to stream those next week. Just have some crazy stuff going on this week with my schedule, so I can't. But next week I will be live streaming those. I'm going to try to get like 3, maybe even 4 to 5 live streams in a week. So like every single day, basically. Like, that's my goal. But so be, on the lookout for that. youtube.com/@lateroundff.
Dark mode bros, get your sunglasses out, because the white light is coming fast and ferocious.
Hey now. Although to be fair, DK is dark and just naturally dark.
Yeah, that's right.
That's right. So we don't have to worry about light mode stuff going on, and people
I wouldn't know
because
I haven't even put my toe into light mode arenas, so I wouldn't even know if it's available.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a different experience too. I mean, I haven't done DraftKings live drafts, on the YouTube channel. It's a it's a different kind of experience when you're doing it in front of people, and you're making sure that you're not doing anything egregiously stupid, but at the same time, I like to be transparent with my process and how I do things. And that's another way of like just generally being transparent. I'm going to make dumb picks. I'll make some good picks. People can yell at me. People can critique the lineup. That's all part of this game, right? That's all part of being a content creator in the space and streaming this and documenting this journey of becoming a best ball bro. It's not just for me. It's for everyone else to sort of like join in and critique and get better themselves too.
And one part about your process, as we jump into the actual football, you talked about last week with elite quarterbacks with Pat. Based on your rankings, it's really hard for me to go through a draft without getting an elite quarterback, which is fine because they all have dual threat ability when you talk about guys like Lamar and Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts. But one of the one of the most interesting things you've come upon the last couple of weeks is quarterback later in the draft and a drop-off point where if you don't got your guys, it gets a little hairy after that Cam Ward, Geno, Darnold area.
Yeah, look, I talked to Neil Orfield, who's the guest on today's show, about this a good bit, actually, in the interview. And I just think that quarterback is really weird on DraftKings, where, and Neil actually had a very similar experience. So I don't want to give away too much about what we talked about because I think that our back and forth was just really, really important. But with quarterback, the elite guys definitely are intriguing. And like you said, I think my rankings and the way that I do them, which by the way, they're on Patreon, they're on the Late Round Fantasy Football Patreon. I've built a formula where I simply compare, where my season long rankings are to where DraftKings is. I merge DraftKings ADP with my season long rankings and I build a formula to sort of weigh positions properly based on the DraftKings format. And so, yeah, I mean, like, I'm not surprised that like a Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson would look better. I think Jaden Daniels might actually be like one or two spots lower though. I actually write about this in my draft guide that I'm working on right now at the quarterback position where, I actually think that I am more at this point in my career, I am more early round quarterback than the masses are, which is wild to think about. And it's crazy because I still think there's this like stance that people have that I'm a late round quarterback guy. I haven't really been that way for years now. That hasn't been like the go-to strat. And I do like a lot of late round quarterbacks this year, but when you get the points edge that you get with the elite guys, but more importantly, the predictability edge that you get with them, Josh Allen has been a top 2 quarterback for like 6 consecutive seasons. Like, you just don't get that at other positions, including tight end, where tight end was that position before. And that was one of the main reasons people were drafting, Travis Kelce and Rob Gronkowski so high was because of that. So, I'm fine with getting the elite guys. I'm not going to be as fine getting some of the pocket passers that are soon after them. I'll get them late, or if I'm stacking, I'll get them in a stack. But what I found on DraftKings is that, once you get into like the Jordan Love, CJ Stroud type tier, and if you pass on that tier thinking you're going to get, the next one, let's just say like Geno, Cam Ward or Darnold or whomever, Bryce Young. If you're waiting on that tier, you got to snatch them quick because oftentimes they just go a lot earlier than you expect. Like the delta between some of those like more established pocket passers or the guys that you feel pretty good about, like a CJ Stroud, going into the Cam Ward, Geno area, which for the record, I'm not saying if any of these guys are over or undervalued right now. I'm just saying that there appears to be pockets in ADP, but it happens fast. Like it changes very, very quickly. And so I think that what I've experienced is that when I'm going with a 3 quarterback build, number one, it's sometimes difficult to know for me, and I talked to Neil about this a little bit, like when to go 3 quarterbacks and when not to go 3 quarterbacks. But then number 2, sometimes I get caught and I'm like, oh man, I forgot to get a guy out of that Geno tier, and now I'm stuck with one of the Giants quarterbacks or Aaron Rodgers and just throwing a dart and hoping that Aaron Rodgers ends up signing with Pittsburgh. I'm stuck with one of these quarterbacks, or I just pass on them because I don't want to waste a roster spot on Jackson Dart, and I just roll with Bo Nix and Geno Smith or something, or these guys where you get one really, really solid quarterback, one kind of questionable one, and do you just roll with that, right? I had one draft where I drafted Kyler Murray and Drake May. And to me, on paper, I think I'm okay with just those 2, right? But then you hear about how frequently people are drafting 3 quarterbacks and how it's a pretty OP type way of drafting. And so I just, I question whether I should be going 3 quarterback or not. So definitely hit the comments on YouTube and talk about how you're kind of approaching the quarterback position. Because right now, I feel okay about how I've approached it. Like, I'm getting the guys that I want. I'm getting a lot of the elite guys. I'll get like Fields and Kyler and some of those rushing profiles, but also in best ball, the rushing profile is probably inflated a little bit. It doesn't, and what I mean by that is it doesn't matter as much because you still do get weekly ceiling from pocket passers, especially when you're not trying to predict them. Like, that's part of the allure of the rushing quarterback, right? But so like, I feel okay with how I've approached quarterback. It's just a matter of like really nailing that down, that roster construction down, and really feeling good about, getting a guy in that like Bryce Young tier, as opposed to waiting and getting kind of screwed with your QB3 and it being Russell Wilson.
To me, logically, the fragility of having two quarterbacks correlates pretty well in the scenarios where you are taking early quarterback, because we're not just betting on those guys being elite in week 17. When we take those guys early, we're betting on them being elite throughout the entire season. So I'm okay marrying that, again, with the fragility of only having two quarterbacks and assuming the risk that comes with injury throughout the season, because we've already put our chips in the middle. This guy is going to be a bell cow on our team at the position. So I think that correlation is fine. It does get a little hairier once your first quarterback is maybe one of these pocket passer types, like a Patrick Mahomes or a Baker Mayfield or the illustrious Jared Goff. Once you start to drop out of that elite tier, it probably makes a lot more sense to go with a 3 quarterback build. And yeah, this cliff right here, the first cliff, even before we get to the later one that you were discussing with the young Ward Smith area, but round 10, it goes 18 picks between Herbert and Trevor Lawrence right now, and then the next highest guy in ADP is Michael Penix. So if you're in desperate times in that 10th, 11th round and you don't get a quarterback, it's going to get hairy real fast.
And the problem too is that if you're trying to extract value and drafting off of ADP and you're at like a turn or something, you often say to yourself, "Oh, I don't have to get this guy right here because look at the gap from this guy to that." But all it takes is 1 or 2 teams to draft that quarterback, and then you can get screwed very quickly. That's really the experience that I'm experiencing, right? Is that like you think you can wait, and then in that individual draft, you can't wait. ADP says you can wait, but you know that that's not always going to be possible. So yeah, I mean, I think that, and Neil echoed this in the interview, but I think that we both see that quarterback is a little bit inflated in general on DraftKings, or more than we expected. And it does make elite quarterbacks look a little bit better.
Yeah, especially when the inflation comes with those mid-tier guys, right? You can only inflate these elite guys so much, and like you said, they've been so consistent because they add so much with their rushing, both from a yardage and a touchdown standpoint. So when these middle tier guys get inflated, it makes them so much less valuable and drive so much more value for these elite guys. You mentioned Drake May, Kyler Murray there, but it sounds like Drake May is a guy you've been targeting a bunch regardless of what draft it is.
I don't know my exposures right now. I think I've drafted maybe 30 teams or so on DraftKings at this point. So and they're not all done. So I haven't calculated my exposure. I don't really care about exposure this early because it's going to fluctuate a whole lot. But I'm pretty sure Drake May is on like half of my rosters. Like legitimately, I don't really understand the ADP when you have so many historical trends that favor this kind of quarterback. I talked about this on the Year of the Sophomore Quarterback episode that I dropped on Tuesday in the podcast feed, where Drake May, Caleb Williams, Bo Nix, JJ McCarthy, Michael Penix, obviously, Jaden Daniels, they all have, or maybe all aside from Penix, all have ADP trends that really, really look good. And one of those trends for these middle round, these QB7 to QB18 quarterbacks, is that they generally, if they're mobile, if they're coming off seasons that aren't high in touchdown rate, and if they're second year quarterbacks in this range have been unbelievably good against expectation. So Drake May, where he's getting drafted, like he goes after, like a Jordan Love, for instance. We know that Jordan Love is not going to give us any of that rushing production, which is a floor thing. Don't get me wrong. And look, in best ball, when it comes to quarterbacks, if there's one thing that I've really realized, especially last year, it's that, of course, rushing matters, but rushing is more of a floor thing than a ceiling thing for these players. And you're really getting your quarterbacks based on the weapons that you're drafting, not getting the quarterbacks and then getting the weapons. Unless it's a late round pick like Drake May kind of is. So essentially, the reason why I have a lot of Drake May is because late in the draft, let's say I get an elite quarterback early, or let's say I get a Kyler or something like that, and I pair him with Trey McBride, then I'm looking for another stack. And if I, miss out on Stephon Diggs, it's not the biggest deal in the world because there's a lot of other New England pass catchers later. And so I can get Drake May knowing that I'm going to have many opportunities to get Kyle Williams, who I like, who they drafted on day 2, and get Hunter Henry, who I like, who last year was tight end 15 and is now being drafted after Mason Taylor and, just tight ends that, shouldn't be drafted after Hunter Henry, in my opinion, in this kind of environment. And so to me, you can draft a naked Drake May and then build after that, right? Like you don't need a weapon for May to get him, because you're going to be able to get some of these other New England weapons later. And I think they're a good candidate to outperform, or to at least perform better in touchdowns per game than they did last year. So this New England stack is a stack that I've just gotten a lot because it's a really, really good, just kind of like emergency type stack. But to me, it's just like there's a lot of trends that point to it being favorable too.
Yeah, there's so many soft landing spots if you take Drake May in the later rounds. Hunter Henry, end of the 15th, Pop Douglas, end of the 16th, and then the other guys are going in the 19th, 20th round. Yeah. So where you might be finding yourselves like, who do I take in these later rounds? If you have Drake May, it's going to make those decisions a lot easier. And outside of fantasy, the Patriots are 8.5 win total juiced to the over. Like, one of the most influential markets in all of sports is telling you that this team is going to bounce back and be good at football. And we know how much offense matters in 2025. So they're telling you that there's a likelihood that this offense bounces back with Drake May healthy, under center for the full season, no Jacoby Brissett, and he's going to have an impact on this team. Let's talk about the Jags backfield, a guy you've been talking about, seems like all year, in Mr. Bashal Tutin, a guy that caught your eye, but you're spreading the love around with the other running backs as well.
There's been a lot of discussion about the Jags backfield on Twitter this week, and folks that are in the best ball community have been talking about it. And there were quotes from Liam Cohen this week about Travis Etienne in particular and how they can get him out in space and use him that way. To me, I think that Bashal Tutin has the most upside of this backfield, but it's more so based on like ambiguity and such. And if you look at history, and look, I've been talking about ambiguous backfields for how long now? And now the term is just...
The first person to ever tweet it, I actually looked this up and I showed it to JJ last year. The first human on planet Earth to hit send after typing out ambiguous backfield was JJ Leckreason.
Which honestly might be a bigger deal for my career than the late round quarterback strategy.
But you're going to always be the late round quarterback guy. There's no escaping that.
Yeah, because like if you look on like anywhere, people were talking about ambiguous backfields all the time, and it was just something that I had written. I think it was like 2017 or something that I had written about it, and it's just grown, and people kind of like understand the concept more and more, which is great. Like I'm not sitting here trying to take credit for it. I'm trying to spread the word, and it's great that it's out there and people use it as a reaction to conversation and things to say. But with those ambiguous backfields, I think that a lot of people assume that the younger player, the more ambiguous player is the one that you should be targeting in these backfields. And I haven't researched this enough this year or re-researched it this year, but I believe in my historical analysis with the ambiguous backfields that hasn't really been the case so much. I mean, it has been more so than not, but it's like, more of like a 60-40 type situation as opposed to like, 90-10 and like you got to get the younger player. So yeah, I'm spreading it around because I could see scenarios where they do use Travis Etienne more than what people are projecting, where Bashal Tutin doesn't really do much in year one. I could see a scenario where Bashal Tutin is like the clear cut go-to guy in that backfield. I see scenarios where Tank Bigsby's the goal line guy and he gives you spiked weeks. So I'm spreading it out in the Jags backfield. I probably have more Tutin than Etienne than Bigsby, but I have all three of them because this is an ambiguous backfield. It's an up-and-coming offense that we should be investing in given that coaching change. And I think all three of these backs can at least bring something to the table. So I'm going to invest in all three. They have multiple injury outs. I like the Jags in general, so I'm going to go that route.
I'm going to say the word one more time. It doesn't get more ambiguous than this. Etienne at 120, Tutin at 129, and Bigsby at 150. And yeah, I think the most optimal route here is to just spread your chips around like it's a roulette table, because I think the only wrong opinion is having a definitive opinion that one of these dudes is going to be the dude.
The thing that I like to think about too, that I really learned last year through doing this exercise, is thinking about how the market will shift, right? As we get into training camp and as we hear more coach speak and stuff and how they're going to deploy these running backs. there's a very real chance that in July, one of these guys really emerges and people, like coaches are saying like, oh yeah, he's going to be the 1A or he's going to be the bell cow in this offense, whatever. And then he rises to, I don't know, pick 80, right? Something like that. But in that scenario, I don't know if like Tank Bigsby is going to lower that much, even if we get some sort of clear picture. And even if we get some sort of clear picture, I don't know if ETN, or like, I don't know if that other running back, like let's say that Tootin is the one who gets steamed up. I don't know if ETN's going to fall that dramatically, right? So like, in my opinion, the investment right now in the Jags backfield can probably only get better as the offseason goes on. Plus there's going to be a lot of just like steam, I think, with this Jags offense. So I'm down to just invest now because I think it's a good investment to make.
Right. One of your bags just goes up and the other two you can just keep clicking at value because they'll drop and they'll become more valuable, but you know, you could just stop drafting the guy that gets super steamed and you'll just have him in your portfolio for later. Niners pass catchers. We got a brand new number for Ricky Pearsall, rocking the number 1 that he rocks down in Gainesville for the Gators, but you can't get enough. George Kittle last week and now the entire lot. Stick him in there.
Yeah, I'm just throwing this out there. I think the 49ers are still undervalued. I did that exercise where I looked at projected touchdowns per game, which I'm actually working on that formula a little bit more. I want to make it even better. But I sent a newsletter blast out that showed some metrics that helped me project next season touchdowns per game, because touchdowns per game obviously is important. If you knew which offenses were going to be good, then you would probably want to spend up on players in those offenses. And so with the 49ers, with that initial formula that was built, and I used AI to help me, which was really fun, but that initial formula that was built, the difference between last season's touchdowns per game to this season's projected touchdowns per game, the team that increased the most was San Francisco. And no Deebo Samuel. You get better target shares for Ricky Pearsall and George Kittle. Brandon Ayuk's probably going to miss some of the front half of the season. And he might not even be 100% throughout the season, who knows? But even if he is, it's fine. Like they could still all eat, in this scenario. And Christian McCaffrey obviously being there and being healthy too. And I think Brock Purdy, I think the whole 49ers offense is kind of undervalued. Like Brock Purdy, it's as if he's being drafted right now, as if he did what he did 2 years ago. Last year, he had over 4 points per game with his legs, which is that is far, far stickier, rushing points per game, than total points per game in terms of like how these guys perform against expectation. Look at rushing points per game from the previous season, not total points per game, and then look at that versus overall average draft position, and you will find more values by looking at rushing points per game in that N-1 season than total points per game. Brock Purdy is a player who is not in that lower tier anymore of like strictly a pocket passer. Now, maybe that changes and he reverts back. Baker Mayfield is kind of the same deal. Like Baker, the reason why I'm not full fading Baker because of his touchdown rate stuff last year is because he had better rushing numbers last year. So there is going to be more stability, I think, with his production. And they obviously drafted Emeka Egbuka too.
I was going to say, Baker might just have a guy wide open on every single play too.
Right. He's got the best weapons. Yeah. Arguably the best weapons in football. And so, but like, this is why I keep railing against like Jared Goff and stuff. And like a guy like Goff is totally different in best ball, where he's going to have spiked weeks and you're really just trying to create the most optimal roster based on who else is on that roster and stacking and stuff. So it's fine to get Goff in best ball. I'm not really like so against him in best ball, because like I said earlier, I'm going to draft quarterbacks based on my weapons, but like there are going to be quarterbacks that I just generally like more than where they're being drafted. And one of them is Brock Purdy, one of them is Drake May. And it's just weird that it seems like people are just completely forgetting that Brock Purdy actually had some mobility last year.
You're not alone. Since last week, both Juwan Jennings and Ricky Pearsall have crept up 5 spots. Yeah, I think maybe when people realize, oh, wait, it's still Kyle Shanahan, it's still the Niners, it's still an offense that's going to be very explosive throughout the season, we might see a continued trend in that direction.
Yeah, and for the record, I like Juwan Jennings too. I wrote in a newsletter blast on Tuesday, and I mentioned Pearsall, but you could just interchange that with Juwan Jennings. It's the same kind of deal, the same kind of idea. You want to invest in this offense. That's my general take. All right, we got to talk about our guest, Neil Orfield. I talked to him earlier today, had a great conversation. He's a DFS player who's won the Millie in the past. He's had multiple six-figure wins. He's been very good as a DFS player. He transitioned a little bit more to the best ball world. He's been a finalist in multiple flagship best ball contests around the industry. He's a great streamer over on YouTube. We talked about his approach to DraftKings versus other platforms, stacking, running back in 2025. He had some good zero RB takes. Talked about a lot of stuff. So Neil, I asked this to Pat Corain last week when he came on Becoming a Best Ball Bro, because I think it's really important. A lot of people play on half PPR platforms in best ball. DraftKings is a full PPR platform. What kind of strategy shifts do you employ and do you see generally going from one of those platforms over to DraftKings?
Yeah, it's funny because I think the obvious answer is the best answer, which is you just target players who are going to get more targets. Like you just want to draft players who are going to see a lot of targets. But like, in general, people are going to be targeting those players anyway. Anybody that you can project for 110 targets is going to be taken early in drafts regardless. So yeah, that's the best answer. And that is honestly true. Like I do a lot more zero RB when there is on a full PPR site, because I just want to target players who are going to get a lot of targets. But beyond that, I also think generally two types of players that I target more on full PPR sites are receivers on offenses that are bad, that are not going to score a lot, are more valuable. Because like, okay, the team is not going to score a lot of touchdowns, but somebody's still going to be targeted a lot. So like the effect of PPR mutes the touchdown value to some extent. Like obviously a touchdown is still very valuable, but a full PPR site does mute that a little bit. So receivers that are going to be targeted heavily on bad offenses, I think are still really valuable and more valuable on full PPR sites than half PPR sites, because yeah, they might not score as many touchdowns as you want because the offense is just not going to score as much. But if the PPR volume is there, they can still have a lot of value. And usually those are players that you can get later. Like you don't really usually have to target players on bad offenses really early in the draft. You can take them kind of as flyers later on. And then the second thing that I do a lot of is pass catching running backs, and primarily like it's obvious guys like Christian McCaffrey, the Austin, Bijan Robinson, guys that go in the first round, like they're going in the first round. Sure. Everybody wants them. But I also think that there are players like Justice Hill becomes a lot more valuable on DraftKings, Austin Eckler, Jaleel McLaughlin. Like there are some players that like I wouldn't even consider on Underdog or on any half PPR site, that on a full PPR site like DraftKings, they become a lot more valuable to me because those are generally going to be shorter targets. They're pretty likely to catch them. So even if, it's a running back who isn't a big part of his offense, he's maybe only going to be targeted 45 times in the year, but like he's going to catch a majority of those because they're going to be shorter targets. And a lot of the time they're also going to be condensed, which is kind of what you want in best ball. You want your players scoring to be condensed. You don't want them to score 6 points every game. You want them to score 0 points one game and then 12 points the next game. I mean, for just as kind of an example, you want the scoring to be condensed. And that kind of happens with those third down, 2-minute drill type running backs. They can just rack up points in a hurry. So I target a lot of those types of players, the third down running back, the pass catching running back, who is not like the first and second down back. And yeah, those are the two prototypes that I think I target the most on DraftKings relative to PPR sites.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because in a season-long managed league, when it comes to a guy like Justice Hill, he's not always going to be the most predictable, especially because Baltimore is generally a decent team and all of that. And so like you don't know when those 2-minute drills are going to hit, when they're in a negative game script and all of that. But in best ball, you don't have to predict that. Like that's the beauty of best ball, right? So I guess my question then is, because of those kind of archetype of running backs, does that make you want to go more zero RB in this environment than it would in a half PPR environment?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a pretty big proponent of zero RB anyway. And actually this year I'm doing a lot more like hero RB. I think I just got bit too hard last year by doing zero RB and everything going terribly for me last year. But yeah, I do a ton of zero and hero RB where I'm not taking more than like one running back in the first 8 rounds. And I'm definitely more comfortable with that on DraftKings and elsewhere, because you can just take several shots on players late that are, like you say, it's unpredictable when they're going to get the scoring, but hope, you take a few of them, you kind of hope that they line up well, where you're getting some kind of production every week with those players. I'm definitely, I think that's probably my primary approach on DraftKings. It's maybe my primary approach everywhere, but like especially on DraftKings, it's really tough for me to take a running back in the first round. Maybe starting kind of like the 1-2 turn, I'm more comfortable starting to take running backs, but it's I kind of need a faller to take a running back in the first round on DraftKings.
Yeah, and also, I mean, obviously with full PPR, and at least the research that I've done for season long and such, obviously it can be different in a best ball environment where you're getting, the best score each week, no matter what. But in your flex, you got to assume that a wide receiver is more than likely going to find that spot. So it's really like you almost have to think of it as maybe not a full 4 wide receiver start, but like a 3.8 wide receiver start. Like you're starting many wide receivers, so it does allow you to lean into zero RB a little bit more. Now, over on DraftKings, you do have those extra 2 rounds too, versus a place like Underdog where there are 18. Having those 2 extra rounds, does that change your approach at all? Does that make you want to go maybe lean in even further into zero RB because you can just tack on 2 random running backs at the end?
Yeah, I mean, that is actually like the primary thing that I think I do differently with the 20 extra rounds is you can often get like an RB2 on a team in the 18th, 19th, 20th rounds on DraftKings. So with the 20 rounds, you can take 8 running backs. Like, there's no problem taking 8 running backs, which you don't really want to do that in an 18 round draft, particularly, I guess half PPR doesn't really play into the equation, but in an 18 round draft, it's really tough to take 8 running backs on a team. In a 20 round draft, you can still be pretty good everywhere else and just like lean into the randomness a little bit more with taking, maybe it's your last 8 picks. You could do that. You could take your last 8 picks, all running backs, and just take a bunch of players with different archetypes. You can take players that have maybe a little bit more of a floor. A guy like Austin Eckler goes pretty late on DraftKings. There are several of those types of players that do feel like they have somewhat of a floor, and you can kind of mix in those guys with the true, like the Todd Brooks, who might be a complete zero, but like has upside potential. And you just kind of like mix in 8 of those archetypes and like, yeah, I mean, it's sometimes you're going to really be bad, really be hurting at the running back position. But like, as many people have said, we're going to lose anyway. So why not take a shot on the upside of just betting on a bunch of those late round running backs? Take your favorites, mix in maybe a couple of the safer guys for a little bit of floor early on. I love that approach on DraftKings, particularly with the 20 round draft. So that's one of the primary things that I do. I like 3 quarterbacks in general, like even in 18 round drafts, I probably average 2.5. Like I take 2 or 3, basically always. In a 20 round draft, I want to take 3 quarterbacks. Like that is one of the things that I'm generally going to be targeting on DraftKings is a third quarterback. You can't really take them later on because all the quarterbacks, as you know, on DraftKings get eaten up really early. It's tough to find late round quarterbacks that maybe there's a couple, but you need to take them a little bit earlier. But you can take those 3 quarterbacks and just know that there are going to be kind of those long shot running backs available later on for you, or wide receivers, tight ends, whatever. But you're more able to build with 3 quarterbacks on DraftKings for the 20 rounds. And then I'd say the only other thing that I do a little bit more often in a 20 round draft is I will sometimes take 4 tight ends. Still not something that I do like most of the time, but it's not uncommon for me to take four late tight ends on DraftKings.
Yeah, I love that you specifically called out Austin Eckler and Taj Brooks, because Eckler to me in particular was one who had like his projection for me is not even really far off in full PPR than to Brian Robinson. Like there's not that significant of a difference. You look at the ADP gap, there is a significant difference, and it's very easy then to go with Eckler. In that environment. And there's obviously upside too if something were to happen to Brian Robinson. Then Taj Brooks was another guy that I mentioned on the late round fantasy football show last week as someone as a rookie in redraft that to me, it just doesn't make much sense to have him be in like the 19th and 20th round in these drafts. I think he should probably be more like a 15th round type player, just because we know the environment's really good. And the guy sitting ahead of him on the depth chart and Chase Brown, I like Chase Brown, don't get me wrong, but we also have to be open-minded about, hey, we only saw, half a season of Chase Brown being an elite bell cow. And so, I think the market is properly, valuing that, because if they weren't, then he'd be like a 1-2 turn type running back, as opposed to where he goes, more in the third. But you have to be open-minded to the fact that it's still a day 3 back that they don't have a massive investment in. And, Taj Brooks wasn't someone that really, really lit it up for me as a prospect, but he also is someone who is in a very, very good draft class, and he was really prolific and good, at least on the ground. So I think there's some upside there. There's a lot of running backs just kind of like that. In those very late rounds. So I think that's a great call out. You did mention quarterbacks and going with 3 quarterbacks. I found it just really strange over on DraftKings going through drafts, and there are certain guys, like I've gotten a ton of Drake May, for instance, over on DK, just because of where he sort of sits and where his tier is in the pocket and where he goes. But to me, it kind of seems like there isn't a big enough gap between some of the higher end decent pocket passer types to that next tier to then the next tier, because there have been instances, and maybe people who are listening have experienced this as well. And I'm coming at this again. I'm trying to become a best ball bro here. So I'm just talking to you about my experience. And I want Neil, as someone who's more experienced, to be able to say, yeah, I've seen that too. That makes sense. Yada, yada, yada. But it seems like if you're relying on a 3 quarterback build, right? You have 2 guys who are, more of like high end 2s or maybe low end QB1s, and you're trying to get this 3rd quarterback, and you're eyeing that tier of like Sam Darnold, Bryce Young, that grouping. It seems like every time you think they're going to be available, they end up not being available by the time you end up picking. And it's like they're that tier, that final grouping at quarterback seems to be elevated like too much, like just a little bit too much. Is that something that you've experienced as well? Like, am I going crazy? Because it feels like every time I need that 3rd quarterback, I'm only stuck with like Aaron Rodgers, crossing my fingers, or a Giants quarterback, right? Whereas I feel like the other guys should be pushed down a little bit more than they are.
Yeah. So as a more experienced best ball player, I mean, I've been playing best ball for 5 years. I started playing when it became popular. So I'm still very much in the learning phase. And I think that we're having kind of the same experience, where it's like every year the landscape changes and doesn't always make sense. And I think quarterback on DraftKings is like the best example there, because in theory, like quarterback is less important on a full PPR site. Like they don't really get reception. So quarterback should be less important. They should generally go later. That is not the experience that I have had on DraftKings at all. People go quarterback crazy. They really, the middling quarterbacks go a lot earlier than I think they should. The bad quarterbacks, all of them get moved up on DraftKings, at least in some drafts. Like the ADP is actually not always entirely crazy, but yesterday I was in a draft where I set up several of those later options, like the Matt Stafford, Geno Smith, had several stacks that I was like, okay, I'm going to get one of these quarterbacks at the next turn. And then they were all gone. It was people taking their 4th quarterback, or like they have 2 elites and they tack on a 3rd, just like completely unstacked. Like you just really can't predict anything on DraftKings. So it's a lot harder to do that. But it is something that I'm toying with, which I think is kind of what you're getting at, which is I kind of think if everybody's going to be forcing up all of the middling or bad quarterbacks, it just makes me want to take those elite quarterbacks early on. Like, why do I want to take Joe Burrow is like a good quarterback. I don't want to call Joe Burrow a middling quarterback, but like for fantasy, he kind of is. So like, why do I want to take Joe Burrow around after where I can get Lamar Jackson or Jalen Hurts or one of these elite quarterbacks? So I think, and honestly, I've only started doing DraftKings drafts. I've only got like 5 under my belt, but I kind of think that's kind of the direction I'm moving in, is just taking those elite quarterbacks. And then, later on when other people are scrambling to get those bad quarterbacks, reaching for a Geno Smith, then I can take, a pretty good wide receiver. I can take a Kyle Williams. I can take one of those mid-round running backs who I think have a lot of value. And I'd take that 2v2 any day with my elite quarterback and an Austin Eckler versus whoever they take in the early round. I think generally it's a good idea to take one of those top quarterbacks and let other people reach and kind of push up the bad and middling quarterbacks. I do think like that is something that I think we're going to have to consider more and more on DraftKings, which feels really counterintuitive to me on a full PPR site to want to take Lamar Jackson, or I know I listen to your podcast, Jalen Hurts. I agree with you. Like it's tough to not want to take Jalen Hurts where he's going. Any of those kind of elite quarterbacks, they feel pretty good when just having at least one of them early on, so you don't have to scramble to get a quarterback later and reach ahead of where you want to on one of those later guys.
Yeah, that's something that I've really talked about and preached over. I mean, really since I started doing fantasy analysis back. So this is like 13 years at this point. But when it comes to quarterback position in a onesie position where there is a scarcity just inherently because there are only so many starting quarterbacks in the league, right? So at most you're going to have 32 guys starting and 32 viable options. And we know that teams like the Giants exist, teams like the Steelers exist. So it just gets lowered and lowered and lowered. Now you're only starting one of them. So naturally, the VORP and the value that you're getting from those quarterbacks aren't necessarily going to be as great. Despite the fact that they are quote unquote scarce, but you have to react to what the market's doing. Like I always say in your regular season long draft that when you're the first team to draft a quarterback, you better be sure that other teams are going to follow, or else you're going to devalue that quarterback selection that you just made, right? So if you, in your season-long league, draft Josh Allen in the second round, and then Lamar Jackson goes in the 6th, and Jalen Hurts goes in the 7th, your Josh Allen pick was a terrible pick, right? And it goes in the reverse, though, too, where if you can be at the start of that run, if you get Josh Allen in the 4th round in your season-long league, and then Jared Goff and Joe Burrow and all these sort of like more pocket passer types go in round 5, then that Josh Allen pick looks a whole lot better than it otherwise would. And that's what you're referring to here, where if these quarterbacks are being pushed up more, then that makes the value of that original quarterback, that elite quarterback that you're taking, that much greater. And it's funny because I've found that a lot of my teams do have those players. Jalen Hurts, I talked about on the show last week. I still have gotten some Josh Allen even. Lamar Jackson, I think, is a little bit easier than getting a guy like Allen. But like I've gotten like a Hurts and Lamar more than I expected to. And I think that's what it is. Just kind of like an inherent, like, I know what the quarterback market's going to look like when I'm in round 13 and 14. I'm not going to be able to get that much reliability because teams are kind of doing crazy things from an ADP perspective, which is a great thing on one hand, right? Because we can really extract some fun ADP value, which is something that Karain talked about last week. But then it's obnoxious on the other hand because your stacks are all screwed up and, you're just not able to, at least when you get that quarterback early, you know what you're working with. Like if you get Josh Allen early, you at least know that you have that quarterback and there are multiple outs then to create that stack.
The other frustrating thing is you really do need to pay attention to like the way the market is moving because we're seeing what the market is doing right now, which is really pushing up the quarterbacks. And I think that's largely going to continue. I think last year that was sort of my experience as well. Like quarterbacks generally went a lot earlier than a lot of them went earlier than I thought they should. So I think it might stick, but it can turn really quickly where suddenly you're in a draft room where people are really waiting on quarterback and then you feel foolish for having taken Lamar Jackson early. So it is important to kind of pay attention to who's in your draft room. Sometimes you'll get to know the drafters a little bit, but also just like kind of paying attention to the shifting tides in best ball. Cause like you say, like just being able to sort of be able to predict what the rest of the room is going to do is pretty important. And it's generally hard to predict what the room is going to do. But I'll say this, my like 3rd and 4th teams on DraftKings felt a lot better than my 1st and 2nd team, where I was just completely boxed out at quarterback unexpectedly because I thought, okay, one of these guys clearly is going to fall to their ADP, and then just none of them did, and I ended up having to take a late Daniel Jones and Jalen Milroe and unstacked, and just like I hated my teams. But later on, I was kind of able to get ahead of it, and it's like, okay, I will reach for this quarterback. Even though I have a later out, I'm not going to wait for those later outs like I often want to. Usually I want to kind of wait for like, all right, I give myself 3 outs. I'll wait for one of those. I started being like, you know what? Those have not worked out. So I'm just going to reach 4 picks and take a different quarterback that I already have stacked up rather than waiting for another quarterback that I have an out later on.
So if you're going 3 quarterback, I have a question of how vital is stacking for you, which I think anyone listening will generally know that answer. But I want to take that sort of to the next level and say, in a 3 quarterback build, let's say, where you have Brock Purdy and then you get Jordan Love, and you're like, yeah, maybe I want to go with one more quarterback. I think that you can probably get away even with those 2, but let's just say that you want to go with a 3rd in that case. Would you be open to just drafting like a naked Anthony Richardson? And for those of you listening, I know some of you are more inexperienced with like best ball and stuff. That just means that there's no other Colts players attached to Anthony Richardson. I'm not saying that I will physically see Anthony Richardson naked and nude as I'm drafting him. This is more so you get an Anthony Richardson and you're doing so, without having Alec Pierce or Adonai Mitchell or Michael Pittman or Josh Downs. Do you do that at times, or do you only do that out of desperation?
Yeah, pretty much only out of desperation. I mean, maybe out of desperation is a little bit of an overstatement because occasionally I will do it. No, I think out of desperation is probably the right way to put it, because ultimately I never go in with the plan like wanting to take a quarterback unstacked. Even when I'm taking 3, I want all 3 to be stacked up. And if you read like Mike Leone's manifesto, Best Ball Manifesto, that was kind of the point that one of the many points that I got out of that was the best EV your lineup can have is 3 quarterbacks all stacked up. Like those are the teams that are really going to look good in the finals. Just gives you multiple outs with the team stack. It's not always possible. So I do end up taking, like I said, I took Daniel Jones and Jalen Milroe as my second and third quarterbacks, and those were unstacked. It's okay. Like I will occasionally end up with some unstacked quarterbacks. And if I have 3 and I have 2 of them stacked up, sure, I guess that's fine. But no, I never want to do that. It is always a kind of a last resort. Like, all right, all my quarterbacks got taken, all of my pass catchers. Like I don't have any pass catchers. I've taken a lot of pass catchers. I don't really want to take any more. So I can't like set up a new stack later on. Then I'll be like, okay, I still think having this third quarterback, like maybe it covers a bye week for me, or maybe I just think my quarterback room is weak. Then sure, I'll take a third unstacked quarterback. But yeah, it's never really my preference to take 3 unstacked. I just think stacking is really powerful.
Do you think there's any credibility to the idea, and I'm thinking about this more on the fly, but to the idea of getting, you drafted a Milroe or getting like an Anthony Richardson who we know can give us spiked weeks by themselves, without really doing anything through the air? Like if you were to go naked in the late rounds like that at quarterback, would that be sort of the archetype? And Daniel Jones even, Daniel Jones can do that too. Would that be sort of the archetype that you'd be looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. I do think like if I'm going to take an unstacked quarterback, I'd rather target one that is a rushing quarterback. And I've done it with Jalen Hurts. Like we already brought up that example. Like sometimes he just falls enough. And honestly, in years past, I wouldn't take him, even at like pick 60. If I didn't have AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, I would often be pretty hesitant. I've kind of come back around to, you know what? Maybe I'll stack them up later, but like some of these quarterbacks, if they fall enough, it's probably just better to take them unstacked because we know we can just have 3 rushing touchdowns in a game. He's very powerful on his own. So it's never my preference to take an unstacked quarterback, even with the rushing quarterbacks, even Josh Allen. Like I'd rather have a stacked Josh Allen than unstacked, even though like his pass catchers weren't really that great last year. But yeah, I've come kind of around to the idea of, maybe some of these rushing quarterbacks, if you get a good enough value on them, you should probably just eat that value rather than like, okay, all of his stacking partners are gone. Can't take him anyway because I don't have them. I've sort of accepted that as maybe a concession I need to make to not stacking occasionally. But so yes, if I'm taking a quarterback unstacked, I really don't want it to be a pocket passer. I want him to have some rushing upside. Even if they are rusher, I prefer to have them stacked. But in some cases, if there's value or just I have a need, I'm willing to take them unstacked if they're a rusher.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. You mentioned that you often will go 0 RB or hero RB where you're not spending that much at the position early. So, I think you can go in a lot of different directions at running back this year. I was surprised when I started drafting on DraftKings by how elevated the running backs were, how it wasn't as wide receiver heavy as I expected, just given, the full PPR platform and there being a flex, because in the flex, obviously you are comparing wide receiver performance to running back performance directly. But yeah, I mean, the running backs are going early. They're going often. I think that part of that is probably a reaction to what happened last year where their health was just unbelievably good and there were some outlier things going on. But, how are you generally looking at the running back position? That's my first question. And then are there any early round running backs that you're just not into this year, just in general?
Yeah, I'm definitely very into 0 RB again this year and hero RB again this year. I really think last year was an outlier. I think like even in some ways that like we haven't really fleshed out. Maybe people have, and I haven't heard those discussions, but like a lot of the receivers that got hurt last year were the receivers that were on pace to absolutely smash. It was Rashee Rice. It was Chris Godwin. It was Rashid Shaheed. Like some of the top receivers, the guys who were crushing their ADPs were the guys that got hurt pretty early on. So I think like those of us who drafted a lot of 0 RB got crushed last year. And the result is we're really pushing running backs up the board, even on PPR sites like DraftKings. But I think the thesis of 0 RB still holds where like late round wide receivers, are just going to hit at a much lower rate and are a lot less predictable than late round running backs. So I still really like taking the points at wide receiver early on and then just taking swings on several running backs late. So yeah, I do think generally I'm going to be doing a lot of zero RB and hero RB again this year. I'm not going to be scared off of one real outlier year last year. And then in terms of players that I'm not drafting at all, the real answer is like where he's going. I'm not going to take a ton of Saquon Barkley just because I'd rather take several of those receivers there. Take the PPR points. But I might end up with 0 Derrick Henry. Like other than drafting with other people who are like adamant, no, you need to take Derrick Henry here. I might just have 0. If he continues to be at that 1-2 turn, I'd just so much rather have all of those wide receivers. Like you can get Brian Thomas often there and people are taking Derrick Henry over Brian Thomas. I love Brock Bowers this year. I think he's just like super powerful. So I think I'll probably end up with zero Derrick Henry on DraftKings.
Let's talk about tight end real quick, because it seems like we have the big 3 at tight end where you have Brock Bowers, who you just mentioned, Trey McBride, and then George Kittle, who I personally think, and I'd love to hear your take on this too, I think George Kittle is like unbelievably undervalued when compared. Like I enjoy drafting Bowers and McBride. Don't get me wrong. Like I'm getting them, but I'm also just getting so much more George Kittle just because of where he falls in drafts and where his projection kind of lines up with McBride. But let's just say that there's a big 3 and then there's the rest. I think that the rest conversation is going to be really important this year. I thought last year, and I said it over and over again on this show, that figuring out tight end in the early rounds is going to be really, really key. And if you had McBride, if you ended up waiting a little bit and getting Brock Bowers, and that was key. It was a really big deal for those squads. But we're kind of back to what tight end used to be like. Last year was kind of this transition period. And then this year we have like the set in stone guys that we feel great about and then the rest. And so my question to you is, which tight ends are you drafting most? Like, what are you doing with the rest?
Yeah, I mean, and the short answer is, so far, I think I've only left one DraftKings draft where I didn't have one of those top 3 tight ends. Like, I'm really going out of my way to get them. And I think that one only happened because my previous draft, I had actually taken McBride and then Kittle fell to me at the 4 or 5 turn. And I was like, ooh, I really want to take Kittle here, but then I already had McBride, so I felt like I couldn't. So then the next draft, I was like, all right, I'm going to wait this time. I'm not going to take McBride. I'm going to get Kittle. And then, of course, he went. So I really do love those top 3. But yeah, if I'm not getting one of those top 3, like I said, I do think like taking 4 late tight ends is a viable strategy. I think there's several that are like pretty good. Often for me, it's just going to be building on stacks, like with those, like a Mike Gesicki if I have Joe Burrow, Hunter Henry if I have Drake May. But outside of that, because you're probably not going to have all of your tight end stack. Actually, Hunter Henry is a good example of like kind of a later tight end that I really like, just like bet on that whole offense taking a step forward. He's one of those that I kind of target. Tucker Kraft, I think I like more than most fantasy football analysts. I just think like watching him, I think he's a pretty damn good tight end. So I think part of it is just like, I think he's good. I think he's really good. I think like, I've heard Mike LaFleur was asked, reading the Coach Speak Index Discord, Mike LaFleur was asked, could Tucker Kraft be your leading receiver next year? And he was like, yeah, of course. Like, and I believe him. Like he's never been one who wants to lean on a top receiver. Wouldn't be that shocking to me to see them just say, you know what? I think our best receiver is our tight end. So Tucker Kraft is just a player that I think is pretty good. Clearly won over that top tight end role on Green Bay. And I wouldn't be that, and it's a good offense. And I wouldn't be surprised to see him get a pretty big target share in that offense. So he's one that I'm kind of targeting where he's going. I'm kind of waffling on Brenton Strange. He was one of my hot takes earlier on. I was like, I think he's pretty good. He was a second round draft pick.
Yeah.
Had some good games last year, but then they took Travis Hunter, which kind of is like, okay, now they've got 2 elite wide receivers. I don't really know what's left over for him, but I still kind of like Brenton Strange where he's going. He's somebody like, if I can get him anywhere near ADP and I need a tight end, I'm probably going to take Brenton Strange. And then I liked the Pat's call out last week of Harold Fannin. I think is a pretty good last round target on DraftKings. Speaking of having those 20 rounds, like I do think that is pretty valuable. Just having that dart throw that could hit in a massive way in the 20th round is pretty cool.
Yeah. So let me ask, if you're getting 4 tight ends, are you mixing and matching archetypes where to me, I look at a guy like Hunter Henry and he looks like someone who is just going to beat ADP, unlikely to be like a league winning tight end, right? Like unlikely. But then maybe you're into Terrence Ferguson or something, whomever, right? Like who has this ambiguous upside as a rookie, who maybe, obviously would have like crazy upside if like Tyler Higbee got hurt, but maybe he just, gets in front of Tyler Higbee on the depth chart at the end of the season or something like that. But you're not going to get that much production from him, especially the front half of the season. Are those 2 tight ends then, if you have a 4 tight end room or even a 3 tight end room where you're getting maybe your tight end 1 being a Kittle or something, and you just get like 2 really, really late round guys to tack on? Are you mixing and matching archetypes like that?
Yeah, I'm trying to kind of have those textures across the board. It's like we talked about with running back, like with Austin Eckler and Todd Brooks. It's the exact same thing for me at tight end. Like I'd rather have some of that like safety, and I think Hunter Henry is like the perfect example of that kind of safe feeling tight end that you can get pretty late. Zach Ertz, I guess, would fit that archetype. I actually don't even know. I don't think I've drafted Zach Ertz yet. I don't know where he's going this year, but last year he was the perfect example of that. Like he actually ended up being maybe closer to a league winner than I would have expected last year. Like he had some big games. But yeah, I definitely want to mix those archetypes when I'm taking, regardless of how many I've taken. I guess maybe if I'm taking 2 elite, then sure, you don't want an archetype of somebody who's not safe. But yeah, generally if I'm taking 3 or 4, I'm mixing in a little bit of safety, and I probably don't want 4 late round rookie tight ends. I want to mix in at least 1 or 2 veterans there.
Yeah. All right, before I let you go, favorite value in draft site right now? You can name more than one. I'm just curious about some of the guys that you seem to be drafting a lot.
Yeah, and we've talked about him a little bit on this show already. Austin Eckler, I would say, is my favorite value on DraftKings. I just think he's gonna see a lot of targets this year. Like that, That is a running back room where they didn't add anything, and he's already the pass catching back. So I think he's really valuable on DraftKings. Pat Bryant also goes pretty late. If I'm throwing out another name, just take a bet on that rookie who was drafted higher than we were expected. Those are the 2 that immediately jump out to me as values that I'm kind of targeting on DraftKings. Honestly, I've been sort of impressed with the ADP on DraftKings in general this year. Like there aren't as many players that I'm just like, oh, this is way too late as there were last year. But those are 2 that kind of stand out to me.
Love those call outs. Both of them I've talked about on the show and sent in newsletter blasts and such. The Pat Bryant one, I don't know. He just isn't being talked about that much within the fantasy space at all. And to me, when it comes to like a late round dart throw like that, you're obviously not going to have many upside cases just because that's why they're in the late rounds in the first place. But with Pat Bryant, at least, like he had a decent enough profile, in my opinion, analytically. But then also, if you look at how that coaching staff and Sean Payton's talked about him, it's been pretty favorable. And he did comp him to Michael Thomas. He said that he reminded him of Michael Thomas, which again, it's May and June. He probably said that like right after the draft. So it's like late April, early May. But building narratives with these late round picks, that's kind of all you got to do sometimes, right? Because there's not that much to latch onto to begin with. And you know that there's a lot of upside with rookies in general and redraft and in best ball. So really, really like that call out. But Neil, this was awesome. Really appreciate you hopping on. Let everyone know what you're doing, what you're working on, and where they can find you.
Yeah, you can find me on X or Blue Sky at PlayerQDFS. You can find me on YouTube. The Flannelverse is my YouTube channel. I'm also going to be doing a lot of best ball content. So far, I've just set up Wednesday night streams, like is going to be a consistent thing going forward. I will be doing more content than that as well going forward. Probably going to do some VODs and other stuff. But yeah, you can check it out at the Flannelverse YouTube channel. My name is, if you search my name, Neil Orfield, you'll also probably find it.
Yeah, it's awesome stuff. Always enjoy drafting with you and hanging out on streams and stuff with you. You can find me on Twitter at LateRoundQB, on Blue Sky as well. Same handle. Make sure you guys check out the late round prospect guide still for sale, late round draft guide in pre-order form. David Kitchen and I will be live 1 p.m. Eastern on Thursday for another episode of the Late Round Fantasy Football Show. Definitely check that out. But otherwise, everyone, thank you for tuning